Hello again. I'm Katie Bloomer with the editorial team at Booktrib, where readers come to discover. I'd like to welcome you to another Booktrib author interview. Today's guest is Wagih Abu-Rish, a Palestinian-American author and activist. He spent much of his career as a businessman, and during a long and varied professional career, he was a foreign journalist in Beirut, Lebanon, and an ad executive on Madison Avenue in New York. According to one reviewer, Wagih Abu-Rish uses his new book, NAD of NADIDÉ, to shed light on the culture, politics, and religion surrounding a few Middle Eastern countries. This book is a classic retelling of Romeo and Juliet, with the trope of forbidden love and political turmoil. NAD of NADIDÉ is exceptionally unique in the retelling of this classic story. Hopefully today we're going to learn a bit more about this book and the fascinating author behind it. Hi Wagih, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Awesome, nice to meet you too. So I'm going to get things started off with a simple question. Where did you get the idea for your book, Not of NADIDÉ?
Well, actually, the idea came through when I was going to high school in Beirut, and this is a process whereby many lovers who went through difficulties with their love affairs would transfer from the American University of Beirut to one or another university in Turkey.
Wow, sounds interesting. So the story explores quite a few things, like the intricacies of love and relationships, friendship, angst, determination, free will, personal dreams, sacrifice, faith. That's quite a checklist. Can you tell us a bit about the storyline and how those emotions evolve?
Well, the storyline is based on the fact that uh, love stories are not easily attained, especially when you have social and political upheaval in societies, and that basically is the main course of the events in the novel.
So at the heart, it's really a love story that everything just makes it more interesting.
Yes, it is a love story. I do specialize in telling the love stories in a fictional way of Palestinians and Palestinian Americans.
Interesting. So the book, as you said, sheds light on the culture, politics, and religion surrounding a few of those Middle Eastern countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, all these guidelines play a role in shaping personal relationships. In this case, it's a love relationship. Here is this guy that leaves one love relationship because of a certain social attitude. Basically, his girlfriend having been an uppity person with no consideration to the working person and no consideration in her case to her own housekeeper. As a result of she revealing her personality and being prodded by his mother, he leaves one relationship unexpected to establish another one. But circumstances on a flight from London to Istanbul establishes or another relationship as he goes after it, because at that time he felt he was spurned and wanted to prove himself, not knowing how much difficulty he would have in the process of starting a new relationship.
So, what are some of the other key big picture themes that you explore in the book?
Uh, he the male character in the story then finds out that on the other side, his female uh, uh, aspiration is also has her own limitations based on religious and social factors, and in this case, political factors, since her father was a very senior person in the military council of Turkey at the time. He aspired, unknown to his own colleagues, he aspired to have his daughter marry somebody by his own guidelines, whereby she would have the pedigree, according to him, of being of the aspiring husband to be 3 generations Turkish and 3 generations not only Muslim, but a certain sect of Islam, which is Sunni Islam. So, with that in the background, the challenges start surfacing in his pursuing to have a relationship with his female counterpart.
Definitely sounds like some interesting stuff going on there. So you mentioned that some of this stuff is, it's personal to you, like what you've experienced in life. So what would you want readers to know about you as a writer, like your background and how that influenced your stories and what you talk about?
Well, through this is my second book, and I will have hopefully my third book next year. Through all 3 books, there are themes in each of the books, and I am here to advance those themes against practices that are prevalent in the countries where the venue of the novels are.
So, you mentioned that the story and the characters are loosely based on what you've seen in, I think you said it was Beirut,
In
or
Lebanon,
Lebanon.
and
Um,
Turkey, yes.
so how else are the stories or characters based on or inspired by your real life experiences?
Well, personally, these are based on mostly on observations rather than my own life experience. I interfaced with people that has gone through these experiences. They did not necessarily go through one person, but it is putting together these experiences in a fictional way to try to have them surface as a theme and then challenging them in the process of telling the story.
So really writing about the world that you're seeing around you.
Exactly. It is about what I have experienced through third parties.
So Nod specifically has been described as a vibrating presence in the story. She's not perfect, but she's a full throttled flesh and blood woman who redefines independence and her own self while embracing the Muslim heritage. So how does this persona of hers influence your story?
Well, in her case, she is the opposite of his first lover. She is his second lover in this case at that age, and she is the opposite. She is very sincere, she's very open, and she's very honest, except that she reacts to certain perceptions without checking them out. And the story gets that story gets complicated as a result of her attitude towards this prospective lover, and by reacting to certain things in a knee-jerk fashion. So that adds her personality as positive as it is described, does have a quirk in it, and that adds to the complexity of the narrative.
Well, she definitely sounds like a fascinating character. So one reviewer compared your story to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I was extremely pleased. Nevertheless, it has happened on a couple of reviewers actually did that, and anybody that is compared to anything that Shakespeare wrote hundreds of years ago is a fantastic commendation. So I liked it, and I had never thought of it this way, and I had never thought of emulating anything in a Romeo and Juliet narrative, but it so happened after it was mentioned in a couple of reviews, I looked at it and then I could see that the people that read the book and reviewed it and described it, they were more right than otherwise. And I'm glad that while there are similarities in the general course of events, there are differences, and at the same time, the venue, the time, and the characters give it a context of its own.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a unique a Romeo and Juliet adjacent story. So I want to talk a little bit about your first book, Replenishing the Sea of Galilee. It's been described as a sweeping story of love, loss, and the power of loyalty in the face of conflicting ideologies and religious beliefs. Meant for fans of Khaled Hosseini, Anita Diamant, and Isabel Allende. So that's a pretty impressive comparison. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
One of the issues in the Middle East is sexual relations between men and women in this case. And I wanted to challenge the constrictions that society puts on adults choosing their relationship, including sexual relationships. So in this case, I tried to depict the main character as a person who did not even know his own guidelines according to his own religion. He had to be taught about it by, he happened to be a Muslim person, and he was taught about his own guidelines by a Jesuit priest who was a professor of Islamic philosophy. And I, by interfacing the two characters, the Jesuit priest on one hand and the Muslim young man on the other hand, not knowing his own guidelines, I wanted to let the gap between what you're supposed to know and what you practice get even wider, because in the end, how much can it get worse than having somebody from another religion teaching you about your own?
Those definitely sound like interesting characters as well. I'll have to add that one to my reading list as well.
Thank you.
So, how would you describe your writing style? Do you map everything out in advance, or do you deviate from that outline, or both?
Well, as a routine, I do an outline, and my outlines range between 10 and 20 pages. And basically, I take them chapter by chapter and I outline them. But my style is a style of storytelling. It's not a style of storytelling with enough description to give the story proper context. There are many writers that are much more descriptive, and the story itself is much more limited. My stories are very complex and very detailed, with enough description to give the narrative the context I wish it to be in.
So, would you say what other writers have served as inspiration for your work?
Oh, I don't have a single writer in this case that gave me, but I definitely all the classical writers, including without knowing it, the Shakespearean writers, the what's her name? the lady that wrote about the Chinese daily life, Beck, and and all kinds. But I don't follow one specific writer as much. I am influenced by lots of writers.
It's good to pull inspiration from many sources like that.
Indeed, yes, this is exactly it.
So back to NAD of NADIDÉ, what would you say was the most difficult part of writing the book?
Well, I think the most difficult part was to relate the political aspect of the story to the social aspect and the love story itself. That was a challenge because you wanted to put everything on the same level and in the same context, and not for the story to escape from you and become a political story rather than essentially a love story.
Well, it sounds like you do a good job melding those together in this book. What do you hope readers will take away from the book?
Well, I hope that they will detect the themes that I'm trying to promote. That this story is not only about a narrative of love, but about a narrative of love facing challenges, and these challenges are resourced through erroneous guidelines, standards, and practices.
So, are you currently working on another project, and can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, I'm working another project. Also, it's a love story and about a Palestinian on a scholarship at Duke University, and he goes to and it takes place in 1980, starts in 1983, and he happened to have met a lover at Duke that was in his own class, but it happened to be that her father had been a military attaché in the Middle East. So she was more familiar with the Middle East than other. They have a relationship. After that, he goes to a political rally where he experiences a very traumatic experience, and I'm not intentionally gonna reveal it, but whereby his manhood is challenged, and the story is about how he reacts to this challenge and this extreme disappointment, and what he goes through afterwards vis-a-vis his lover, whom he basically ends the relationship with, and what happens to him afterwards.
Well, I'm definitely excited to hear more about that. But we are about out of time for today. Again, the book is NAD of NADIDÉ. The author is Wagih Abu-Rish. Wagih, thanks for joining us today. I'm Katie Bloomer.
I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that everybody will try to look for the themes I've tried to promote in this book. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I'm Katie Bloomer. We'll see you next time. Until then, go read a book.
Bye-bye now.